Hello, and welcome to the Boys Book Club. Today we'll be diving into Honre de Balzac by Pere Goriot. We will be doing this by 10-page segments due to there not being chapters. Mimi Vaqueur is an elderly person who for the past 40 years has kept a lodging house in the Rue Neuve Saint-Geneviève, in the district that lies between the Latin Quarter and the Faubourg Saint-Marcel. Her house, known in the neighborhood as the Maison Vaqueur, receives men and women, old and young, and no word has ever been breathed against her respectable establishment. But, at the same time, it must be said, as a matter of fact, no young woman has been under her roof for 30 years, and that if a young man stays there for any length of time, it is a sure sign that his allowance must be of the slenderest. In 1810, however, the time when this drama opens, there was an almost penniless young girl among Mimi Vaqueur's boarders. That word drama has been somewhat discredited as of late. It has been overworked and twisted to strange uses in these days of dolorous literature, but it must do service again here, not because this story is dramatic in the restricted sense of the word, but because some tears may perhaps be shed intra et extra muros before it is over. Will anyone without the walls of Paris understand it? It is open to doubt. The only audience who could appreciate the results of close observation, the careful reproduction of minute detail and local color, are dwellers between the heights of Montreux and Montmartre in a vale of crumbling stucco watered by streams of black mud, a vale of sorrows which are real and of joys too often hollow. But this audience is so accustomed to terrible sensations that only some unimaginable and well-nigh impossible woe could produce any lasting impression there. Now and again there are tragedies so awful and so grand, by reason of complication of virtues and vices that bring them about, that egoism and selfishness are forced to pause and move to pity. But the impression that they receive is like a luscious fruit soon consumed. Civilization, like the car of a juggernaut, is scarcely stayed perceptibly in its progress by a heart less easily to break than others that lie in its course. This also broken, and civilization continues on her course triumphant. And you, too, will do the like. You, who with this book in your right hand will sink among the cushions on your armchair and say to yourself, "Perhaps this may amuse me." You will read the story of Father Goriot's secret woes, and dining thereafter with an unspoiled appetite, will lay the blame of your insensibility upon the writer, and accuse him of exaggeration of writing romances. Ah! Once for all, this drama is neither a fiction nor a romance. All is true, so true that everyone can discern the elements of tragedy in his own house, perhaps in his own heart. The lodging house is Mimi Vaqueur's own property. It is still standing at the lower end of Rue Neuve Saint-Geneviève, just where the road slopes sharply down to the Rue de l'Arbalète. That wheeled traffic seldom pass that way, because it is so stony and steep. This position is sufficient to account for the silence prevalent in the streets shut in between the dome of the Pantheon and the dome of Val de Grace, two conspicuous public buildings which give the yellowish tone, the landscaped and darkened building, the whole district that lies beneath the shadow of the laden hued cupolas. In that district, the pavements are clean and dry. There is neither mud nor water in the gutters. Grass grows in the chinks of the walls. The most heedless passerby feels the depressing influences of a place where the sound of wheels creates a sensation. There is a grim look about the houses, a suggestion of jail with high garden walls, a Parisian straying into a suburb, apparently composed of lodging houses and public institutions, would see poverty and dullness, old age lying down to die, and joyous youth condemned to drudgery. It is the ugliest quarter of Paris, and it may be added, the least well known. But before all things, the Rue Neuve Sainte Genevieve is like the bronze frame for a picture, for which the mind cannot be too well prepared by the contemplation of sad hues and somber images. Even so, step by step, the daylight decreases, and the cicerone's droning voice grows hollower as the traveler descends into the catacombs. The comparison holds good. Who shall say which is more ghastly, the sight of bleached skulls or of dried-up human hearts? The front of the lodging house is at right angles to the road, and looks up upon a little garden, so that you can see the side of the house in section, as it were, for the Rue Neuve... Gonna kill me. From the Rue Neuve Sainte Genevieve, beneath the wall of the house front, there lies a channel, a fathom wide, paved with cobblestones, and beside it runs a gravelled walk bordered by geraniums and oleanders and pomegranates, set in great blue and white glazed earthenware pots. Access into gravelled walk is afforded by a door, above which the words Maison Vauquer may be read, and beneath it, in rather small letters, lodging for both sexes, etc. During the day, a glimpse into the garden is easily obtained through a wicket to which a bell is attached. On the opposite wall, at the far end of the gravelled walk, a green marble arch was painted once upon a time by a local artist. In the semblance of a shrine, a statue representing Cupid is installed, a Parisian Cupid, so blistered and disfigured that he looks like a candidate for one of those adjacent hospitals, and might suggest an allegory to lovers of symbolism. The half-elaborated inscription on the pedestal beneath determines the date of this work of art, for it bears witness to the widespread enthusiasm felt for Voltaire on his return to Paris in 1977. Whoever thou art, thy master see, he is or was or ought to be. At night, the wicket gate is replaced by a solid door. The little garden is no wider than the front of the house. It is shut in between the wall of the street and the partition wall of the neighboring house. A mantle of ivy conceals the brick and attracts the eyes of passersby to an effect which is picturesque for Paris. For each of the walls is covered with trestled vines that yield a scanty, dusty crop of fruit, and furnish beside a subject of conversation for Mimi, Vauquer, and her lodgings. Every year, the widow trembles for her vintage. A straight path beneath the walls on either side of her garden leads to the clump of lime trees at the far end of it. Lime trees, as Mimi Vauquer persists in calling them, in spite of the fact that she was de Conflans, and regardless of repeated corrections from her lodgers. The central space between the walks is filled with artichokes and rows of pyramid fruit trees, surrounded by a border of lettuce, pot herbs, and parsley. Under the lime trees there are a few green painted garden seats and a wooden table, and hither during the dog days such of the lodgers as are the rich enough to indulge in a cup of coffee come to take their pleasures, though it is hot enough to roast eggs even in the shade. The house itself is 3 stories high, without counting the attics under the roof. It is built of rough stone and covered with a yellowish stucco that gives a mean appearance to almost every house in Paris. There are 5 windows in each story in the front house. All the blinds visible through the small square panes are drawn up awry, so that the lines are all at cross purposes. At the side of the house there are 2 windows on each floor, and the lowest of all are adorned with a heavy iron grating. Behind the house, a yard extends for some 20 feet, a space inhabited by a happy family of pigs, poultry, and rabbits. The woodshed is situated on the far side, and on the wall between the woodshed and the kitchen windows hangs the meat safe, just above the place where the kitchen discharges its greasy streams. The cook sweeps all the refuse out through a little door into the Rue Nueve Sainte Genevieve, and frequently cleanses the yard with copious supplies of water, under pain of pestilence. The house might have been built on purpose for its present use. Access is given by French windows to the first room on the ground floor, a sitting room which looks out upon the street through the two barred windows already mentioned. Another door opens out of it into the dining room, which is separated from the kitchen by the wall of the staircase, steps being constructed partly of wood, partly of tiles, which are colored and beeswaxed. Nothing can be more depressing than the sight of that sitting room. The furniture is covered with horsehair woven and alternatively dull and glossy stripes. There is a round table in the middle with a purplish red marble top, on which there stands, by the way of ornament, the inevitable white china tea service covered with half-effaced gilt network. The floor is sufficiently uneven, the wainscot rises to elbow height, and the rest of the wall space is decorated with a varnished paper, on which the principal scenes from Telemaque are depicted, and various classical personages being colored. The subject between the two windows is the banquet between Calypso to the son of Ulysses, displaying Therion for the admiration of the boarders, and has furnished jokes these 40 years to young men who show themselves superior to their position by making fun of the dinners to which poverty condemns them. The hearth is always so clean and neat that it is evident that a fire is only kindled there on great occasions. The stone chimney piece is adorned by a couple of vases filled with faded artificial flowers imprisoned under glass shades, on either side of the bluish marble clock in the very worst of taste. The first room exhales an odor for which there is no name, in the language in which it should be called the boarding house stench. The damp air sends a chill through you as you breathe it. It has a stuffy, musty, and rancid quality. It permeates your clothes. After dinner scents seem to be mingled in it with smells from the kitchen and scullery and the reek of a hospital. It might be possible to describe it as someone should discover a process by which to distill from the atmosphere all the nauseating elements with which it is charged by the carterial exhalations of every individual lodger, young or old. Yet, in spite of these stale horrors, the sitting room is as charming and as delicately perfumed as a boudoir, when compared to the adjoining dining room. The paneled walls of that apartment were once painted some color, now a matter of conjecture, for the surface is encrusted with accumulated layers of grimy deposit, which cover it with fantastic outlines. A collection of dim-ribbed glass decanters, metal discs with satin sheen on them, and a pile of blue-wedged earthenware, plates of Touraine ware cover over the sticky surfaces of the sideboards that line the room. In a corner stands a box containing a set of numbered pigeonholes in which the lodgers' table napkins, more or less soiled and stained with wine, are kept. Here you see that indestructible furniture never met with elsewhere, which finds its way into lodging houses, much as the wrecks of our civilization drifts into hospitals for incurables. You expect in such places as these to find the weather house whence a capuchin issues on wet days, and you look to find execrable engravings which spoil your appetite, framed every one in a black varnished frame, with a gilt beading around it. You know, the sort of tortoise-shell clock casing inlaid with brass, the green stove, the argon lamps, covered with oil and dust, have met your eyes before. The oilcloth which covers the long table is so greasy that a waggish outsider will write his name on the surface using his thumbnail as a style. The chairs are broken down invalids. The wretched little hempen mats slip away from under your feet without slipping away for good. And finally, the foot warmers are miserable wrecks, hingeless, charred, broken away about the holes. It would be impossible to give an idea of an old, rotten, shanky, cranky, worm-eaten, halt, maimed, one-eyed, rickety, and ramshackled condition of the furniture without an exhaustive description which would delay the progress of the story to an extent that impatient people will not pardon. The red tiles of the floor are full of depression brought about scouring and periodically renewings of color. In short, there is no illusory grace left to the poverty that reigns here. It is dire, parsimonious, concentrated, threadbare poverty, and as yet has not sunk into the mire. It is only splashed by it, though not yet in rags. Its clothing is ready to drop into pieces. This apartment, in all its glory, is 7 o'clock in the morning, when Mimi Vacquier's cat appears, announcing the near approaching of his mistress, and jumps upon the sideboards to sniff at the milk in the bowls, each protected by a plate, while he purrs his morning greeting to the world. A moment later, the widow shows her face. She is tricked out in a net cap attached to a false front set on awry, and shuffles into the room in a slipshod fashion. She is an oldish woman, with a bloated countenance, and a nose like a parrot's beak set in the middle of it. Her fat little hands, she is as sleek as a church rat, and her shapeless, slouching figure are in keeping with the room that reeks of misfortune, where hope is reduced to speculate for the meanest stakes. Mimi Vacqueur alone can breathe that tainted air without being disheartened by it. Her face is as fresh as a frosty morning in autumn. There are wrinkles about the eyes that vary in their expression from the set of smile from a belly dancer to the dark, suspicious scowl of a discounter of bills. In short, she is at once the embodiment and interpretation of a lodging house, as surely as her lodging house implies the existence of its mistress. You can no more imagine the one without the other, and you can think of jail without a turnkey. The unwholesomeness, corpulence of this little woman is produced by the life she leads, just as typhus fever is bred in the tainted air of a hospital. The very knitted woolen petticoat that she wears beneath a skirt made of an old gown, with the wadding protruding through the rents in the material, is the sort of epitome of the sitting room, the dining room, and the little garden. It discovers the cook. It foreshadows the lodgers. The picture of the house is completed by the portrait of its mistress. Mimi Vacqueur, at the age of 50, is like all women who have seen a deal of trouble. She has glassy eyes and an innocent air of a trafficker in flesh and blood, who will wax virtuously indignant to obtain the higher price of her services, but who is quite ready to betray a Georges or a Peregrue if a Georges or a Peregrue were in hiding and still to be betrayed, or for any other expedient that may alleviate her lot. Still, she is a good woman at bottom, said the lodgers, who believed that the widow, who was wholly dependent upon the money that they paid her, and sympathized when they heard her cough and groan like one of themselves. What had Mimi Vacqueur been? The lady has never been explicit on this head. How had she lost her money? Through trouble, was her answer. He had treated her badly, had left her with nothing, but her eyes cry over his cruelty, the house she lived in, and the privilege of pitying nobody, because she was wont to say she herself had been through every possible misfortune. Sylvie, the stout cook, hearing her mistress's shuffling footsteps, hastened to serve the lodgers' breakfast. Besides those who lived in the house, Mimi Vecure took boarders who came for their meals. But these outsiders usually only came to dinner, for which they paid 30 francs a month. At the time this story begins, the lodging house contained 7 inmates. The best rooms in the house were on the first floor, Mimi Vecure herself occupying the least important, while the rest were let to a Mimi Couture, the widow of a commissary general in the service of the Republic. With her lived Victorine Taillefer, a schoolgirl, to whom she filled the place of a mother. These 2 ladies paid 1,800 francs a year. And that is the end of page 10, and I will be picking that up for you boys later. Enjoy.